We've got our glow plugs all back in place. Unfortunately for us, we had a hard start problem and all of our glow plugs checked out. So we're gonna check some of the fuel system. There's something a little strange with the number 2 fuel injector. Alright, so we've got our glow plugs all back in the engine now, and at this point, if you'd found a bad glow plug, or you've just replaced all of them, you could go ahead and just throw that bus bar back on, reinstall the intercooler, and you'd be good to go and restart it again when the engine is cold. Unfortunately, we know we had a hard start, and we didn't find any bad glow plugs. So that means the problem is likely not in the glow plug system itself. We need to start looking elsewhere. Being that this is a mechanical diesel, there really isn't a lot going on in them, so we're gonna have to take a look at the fuel system. And while I was in here, I did notice there's something a little strange with the number 2 fuel injector. If we look around number 1, we can see that there's a little bit of dirt and whatnot, but it's fairly clean. Same with number 3 and number 4. But if we look closer around number 2, we'll see that in the back and all around the base here, there's signs of moisture and carbon buildup. Now, that could mean a couple of things. It could mean that the injector itself is weeping and there's a little bit of fuel that's collecting in that area, allowing all the dirt to stick around it. It could also mean that we're getting combustion coming up around the injector, and that's actually carbon that's starting to build up and build up and build up. So either way, we know that there's something going on with injector number 2. So we're gonna pull off the fuel lines, the return line, and we're gonna pop injector number 2 out of there and see if we can see maybe what's going on. First thing we need to do is crack the injector lines loose, and you'll need a 17mm wrench to do that. Well, the proper thing to do here would be to unbolt these lines from the pump itself, but we're just gonna gently pull them out of the way. And then with the same 17mm, we can remove the return line nuts. If you're having a difficult time accessing the fuel injectors, loosening off the transmission dipstick can gain you a little bit more access. Once you have the retaining nuts off, we can remove the return line itself. Now be very careful when you take this off. It can be delicate and you don't want to break it. I'm just gonna go ahead and clear some of this stuff out of here while I have access. It's actually very, very, very hard, so I think this is carbon. And now we can go ahead and remove our fuel injector. Now I'm using a 7/8 socket here. Obviously this shouldn't be 7/8, it should be a 22, but I don't have a 22 thin wall. Well, I had a 22 thin wall, but I don't know where it's gone. Well, that was a bit of a task getting this out. You can see all that carbon built up all around the outside here. And what that means is the copper O-rings or copper washers that actually sit at the base of this injector have failed, and they're letting combustion and exhaust escape out around the injector itself. That's where all that junk has come from. So what we're gonna do here is I'm gonna take this injector, I'm gonna throw it in the sonic cleaner and try break off all the rest of the carbon buildup that's on it. And in the meantime, while it's doing that, I'm gonna try and clean up the injector hole as well. Now I had to get this out doing a little bit of a no-no. I actually used an impact gun to remove it, and that's definitely not ideal. It's quite risky actually, but I couldn't actually get enough force on the ratchet when it was in there. So a whole bunch of back and forth with the gun, real gentle taps and a lot of penetrating oil. And it did come out. I really don't recommend doing that. So let's get this thing cleaned up and we'll get it all back together, and hopefully this helps our hard start problem. So a little tip for you if you do have a sonic cleaner or plan on getting one. If you just take this thing and throw it straight into the cleaner, it'll make a huge mess of whatever fluid that you have in there. I just have water. So what you can do is take a glass jar, fill it with whatever cleaning solution that you want, and then take your dirty part and just drop it into the glass jar. The vibrations from the sonic cleaner will go right through the glass and right into the cleaner that you have in the jar, and that way you don't contaminate the water or cleaner in the sonic cleaner itself. The other benefit to this is you could have multiple jars with different parts and different cleaners in it, all in the sonic cleaner at the same time without concern of contamination. So once they've come out of the sonic cleaner and we've given them a good solid wipe down, all of that built up carbon has come off quite nicely. So we have nice clean parts. Now if you are doing this to all of your injectors, make sure you keep them all separate because each one of these pieces will have a different number on it, and that is to make sure that each injector flows correctly. This spacer, the nozzle, and the pin are all unique to the injector that you take them out of, so keep them separate. Once you're satisfied that there's no dirt or debris or carbon left in there, you can go ahead and start reassembling. And that's not moving very smoothly, so I'm just going to spray some cleaner through here just in case we've got a little piece of carbon built up inside. When you reinstall the shim, make sure the number is facing up to the top of the injector. And that's what you should be left with once you've cleaned up the injector and completely reassembled it. Now, I originally wasn't going to take this apart, but I noticed there was a lot of carbon built up between the two pieces of the body. Figured I'd take it apart and just take a look inside, and there was actually a lot of carbon built up and just junk that was sitting inside of this injector. If you get any kind of contaminant inside there, you can stick the injector open, stick it closed, or just make a really bad spray pattern. We've cleaned all of that out now, got it all reassembled, and we're gonna put it back into the vehicle. And one thing that should be replaced, and unfortunately we can't replace because I don't have a new one, is this return line washer. It's an aluminum washer, and you can see that it's got two small holes in it. But we're just going to reuse this old one. I'm actually just going to flip it upside down so it can clamp a little bit differently than it did originally. I did manage to get the copper washer out of the cylinder head, and as you can see, it's completely covered in carbon on both sides. And you won't be able to see it in the video, likely, but there's a lip built up on the outside from this washer being compressed by the injector. So we are going to replace this. You don't have to do this. I like to anti-seize them, just so they don't seize in there. We've got our injectors back in again. Our glow plugs are hooked up. Last thing to do, throw the intercooler back on, and then we can try fire it up. Now you could leave the intercooler off at this point so you can bleed the injectors, but I gotta get this thing out of here, so I'm just gonna cross my fingers that I'm not gonna need to bleed them. Now you'll notice I did both number 2 and number 1. Once I had access in there, I was able to see the bottom of number 1 was starting to get a little bit of carbon in there as well. So that told me that number 1 was also starting to leak past its seal. And it's a good thing I took it out because there was actually a lot of carbon buildup down there. It was a nightmare trying to get the washer out of the injector hole. 1 and 2 are both done now. 3 and 4 still look good, so we're not going to bother touching them today. Hopefully they'll last a while longer. Don't forget to reconnect these wires in the back. And that pretty much wraps up this job. I didn't go into really deep detail on how to dismantle and reassemble the fuel injectors. The main thing that you have to remember is how you take it apart is how it has to go back together. Make sure all the parts match the injector that you took apart, don't mix them up, and make sure there's absolutely no dirt, no grime, no carbon inside that injector when you reassemble it. It needs to be spotless. Taking them apart, cleaning them, and just putting them back together isn't the ideal way to do this. It would have been much better to go buy a full injector rebuild kit. I wasn't actually planning on taking those injectors apart today. It just kind of worked out that way. I doubt this is likely what's causing the hard start. Fact is, we had a problem there. It needed to be addressed, so we addressed that today anyways. I did notice there was a lot of moisture around the back of the fuel pump itself, and that indicates that we might have some weeping there. Once the fuel pump starts to leak like that, it can take air in as well as let fuel out. And when you get air into the fuel system on a diesel, you can have a lot of strange running issues. Smoke, rough running, hard start, smoky starts. So there's a good possibility that this thing is going to need a pump rebuild in the future. At least we've got these issues sorted out. If you enjoyed today's video, please hit that like and subscribe button. It really keeps me motivated to keep on doing these. Otherwise, okay, I didn't have any luck with just trying to start it without bleeding them. It wouldn't go. It'd start and it would die. So I had to get...
Hi, me again.
I had to get a little bit of help. So if you do run into the problem, or after you do this, the vehicle doesn't want to start, or it starts and dies, or it just keeps on running rough, so what you're gonna do is have a second person pumping your primer over here, and they'll just keep on pushing that while you crank it over. And once you get it started, you're gonna crack each one of the injector lines one by one, and you'll see bubbles coming out. When the bubbles go away, it means you've got all the air out of that injector. You move on to the next one. Do all 4, and it should start running nice and smooth for you. See you later.